Hello and welcome to this oil market review with none other than Glenn Wepener from First Abu Dhabi Bank, who is the Chief Strategist. Hi Glenn, thanks for joining us.
James, nice to see you again.
Good to see you. Let's get stuck in. So oil prices, there's been lots of volatility recently. What's your review? How can you demystify what's going on within the crude market?
Well, you're right. I mean, it's been a tough trading year for most markets, in fact, not just oil. But I think when it comes to the oil prices, we seem more recently to have slipped into this $107 a barrel to $117 a barrel band for the time being. Obviously, supporting factors are the ongoing concerns over supply, but also the low level of fuel inventories, particularly diesel, for example, in the OECD countries. And then conversely, on the other side, capping the market is growing worries about a potential global economic recession, which unfortunately I think does have some validity to it. And then, of course, uncertainty surrounding when China is going to, or when the Chinese economy is going to return fully. And this, we know that Shanghai is planning, hoping to return to normalcy from June. But we're also seeing COVID numbers going up again in Beijing and other places like Ningbo. And if we take into account that it's clear that the Chinese want to continue to pursue the zero COVID strategy, this means that probably we're not going to see the Chinese economy return fully for the time being, at least for the near term. Other issues on the market, obviously Russian supplies has been a big topic. I had a look at some preliminary numbers for May. It does look like, for this month anyway, the amount of Russian oil supplies hitting the market is only going to be around 4 or 5% below what it was in February. But then the bigger question is this sustainable, especially if there's more enhanced sanctions coming? We know the European Union has been talking about implementing an embargo on Russian oil. Obviously, they have a few hurdles to get over before they can get there. We know that places like Hungary, the landlocked countries, are opposed to it at this point because they rely heavily on Russian oil for their energy needs. So that's going to be a question to see how that proceeds over the next couple of months. But I think that overall, in terms of the market, I think for this year at least, I think that we've already seen the highs. I don't think we're going to retest the levels that we saw in early March, the close to $130 a barrel level. But at the same time, I think equally on the downside, I think $90 a barrel looks like it's pretty firm support for now, unless we get a major sea change in the situation, particularly regarding Ukraine and Russia.
Okay. Do you agree that US shale output has been lagging?
Yeah, I mean, that's another issue, and we touched on it a little bit in our last conversation earlier this year. It's true that overall US output has not kept pace with the rebound in oil prices since the beginning of 2021. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is the fact that the shale companies are focusing much more on generating positive cash flows and reducing their debt since 2020 as compared to what was happening the decade prior to that. But more recently as well, the oil companies are also struggling to find skilled labor, particularly in the US. And also, the cost of inputs. So, for example, steel prices are really high as well. So this has also slowed down, if you like, US production in general. But the picture is improving. We are starting to see US production rising again. I think this is highlighted by the fact that the number of active oil rigs in the US has risen quite sharply. So last week, I think we were standing around 575 active rigs, as opposed to around 350 this time last year. So I think what's going to happen in the second half of this year, we'll probably see US oil production rise to around 12 million barrels per day, perhaps even a little bit more than that. Obviously, it's below the record 13.2 million barrels per day that they achieved a few years ago. But as I say, I think the picture is definitely improving.
Okay. Going back to January, the last time that we shot the video, it was talks about Iran, deal or no deal. There's been some news recently in the press saying that the outcome looks a little bit bleak. Do you agree? What's your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I mean, as you say, when we had the conversation at the beginning of the year, I said that, well, I opined at the point that I thought that if there wasn't a deal done by the end of March, then it was very unlikely an agreement would be reached this year. So what's happened since then? Since March, talks have been on hold. Basically, nothing's happened since March. Why? There are a couple of key sticking points that they're unable to break through at this point. The one is that the Iranians are demanding that the US removes its terror designation on the IRGC. And the second point is the demand or request by the Iranians that the Americans legally commit that they will not pull out of any new agreement in the future. In terms of point one, we've already seen the American officials say several times over the past few weeks that they have no plans to change the designation on the IRGC for now. And on the second point, I mean, I'm not a lawyer, but I think that legally it would be a very difficult option for the US to commit to such a thing. I don't even know it's actually possible. So these are not the only two hurdles, but these are two of the major hurdles at this point. Now, as you say, there's been some developments over the last few weeks. The European Union sent an envoy to Tehran. Obviously, the Europeans are as keen as the Americans to try and get some fresh oil supply into the market. Apparently, this envoy did make some progress in her discussions with the Iranians, but as yet, the talks still haven't resumed. I think it's it still looks pretty much up in the air, and to me, it seems to be fading at this point. But anything is possible, I guess.
Correct. Final question: what keeps you up at night?
Several things, but I think right now the biggest thing that I'm looking at and I'm concerned about is the ongoing food security crisis. So you could call it actually food insecurity crisis. This is something that's been building for a number of years, of course. There's various drivers for it. There's conflict. There is climate change, and more recently, of course, the logistics logjam that occurred during and after the pandemic. But it really has got to extreme levels. Food prices are at record highs and only getting worse. Again, accelerated by the Ukraine conflict at the moment as well. And this is something I think that's really getting to the point that a number of countries are very high risk of severe socio-economic and even perhaps political upheaval. I guess the most recent example we could perhaps point at would be Sri Lanka. You've seen what's been happening in Sri Lanka over the recent weeks or so. But we've seen cost of living protests around the world. We've seen it in Peru, we've seen it in Iraq, we've seen it in Iran, we've seen it in Lebanon, etc., etc. And I produced a piece earlier this week on Monday. I published it, and when I was researching the data, it actually was very, very depressing. Just to give you some idea of what I found. Well, for example, at the end of last year, so end of 2021, before the Ukraine story broke, roughly 800 million people around the world are going home hungry at night, every night. And as I say, yes, this is a key risk for developing and emerging countries in particular, but it's affecting every country. There was an Ipsos survey that was conducted a couple of weeks ago in the United Kingdom, and that showed a couple of things. One was that 3 out of 4 Britons are very concerned about the rise in the cost of living. But more importantly, 1 in 4 are already being forced to skip meals every day. Wow. from 1 or maybe even more, because their household budget just can't afford it anymore. So you can imagine when you start looking at regions such as the sub-Saharan region, what an impact it's currently having. If you take in the sub-Saharan area, it takes about 40% of an household income is spent on food, where emerging markets probably averages around 25%. So that's huge. And as I said, it's something that's continuing. It's something I think that, yes, it's starting to be talked about more. Governments are looking at it. Agencies such as the UN Food Programme and the IMF and so on are getting involved, but not enough is being done yet. And what concerns me a lot is that we carry on down this path. There is real chance of a hunger catastrophe in certain parts of the world, and that would be really I think horrific. So hopefully things will change, solutions will be found. We found solutions for the pandemic. Hopefully we can do that again. But yeah, that's one of the key things I think keeping me awake at night.
Always super informative, always super insightful. Thank you so much, Glenn, and see you for the next video.
Thanks, James. Good to see you.
Take care.
Thanks again.